Today, we are going to be reviewing Crash of Cars. Now, I can't make one definitive review because the game keeps getting updates, and every update might change how I feel later on about the game. So, this review will be an initial first review, and as every update comes along, I'll make a new review about that update. And this will pretty much be, I would say, like the starter review. This is pretty much where you get to hear about every feature in the game, most of the stuff about the game, and then every other video later is going to be just about the update. So the new cars, new maps potentially, and a couple of other stuff. So we're going to start with the review of Crash of Cars. Now, in order to make future reviews useful by you knowing whether they actually improved the game or worsened the game, I will separate this review into segments. So we're going to talk about design, as in the UI and graphics. Then we're going to talk about the cars, the gameplay mechanics. Then we're also going to cover the maps, and a couple of other stuff. And I'll give you a score from 0 to 10 as to what I think the actual element I'm reviewing is actually good. So let's start with the design, and I'll first start with the UI. So the game actually received major changes in the UI, but not so often. So the game actually started out in a very simple UI, but then we actually got this current UI, which I would say is a definite great move. In fact, the game is constantly getting better in terms of the UI. Not Doppler actually improved the UI of the game with every improvement in that area. So I can say they are moving in the right direction, and I really like what they have done in the last UI update, where they gave the maps like a little visual overhaul where you can actually see a segment of the map you're about to select, and everything is just presented so clearly. The actual tab for choosing a match is much more larger, and the elements, like how the UI looks, is just so better, and this is definitely a great move. However, apart from this, nothing else has actually changed drastically, like the positioning of the level, the icons, and in the prestige section, there aren't any changes. Nothing over in the coin section, nothing over in the gem section. Pretty much almost everything is as it was from the beginning, and I would say this is fine. There are no needs to change all of this, but the whole change map aesthetic, which was definitely changed, I think is a great move, and I don't think they can improve on this any further, mostly because they don't need to. This current system works really great, and they don't need to force themselves to change this even more. But if they can figure out something even nicer, that would be amazing. Now, as far as the UI in terms of the settings, I would say this is where maybe there should be some improvements, because let's say the button controls, you have like this toggle and you can switch from button to joystick controls, and I know it may sound a bit strange, at least for someone who's played this game for over 2 years, to ask for something like this, but I think newer players might appreciate this, and that is giving you the ability to actually access another menu where you can have like the button and joystick controls in like 2 tabs side by side, and a little animated tutorial, more like a GIF tutorial, will play showing you how to use these controls. Because if you just switch from one of these controls, you don't actually really see a tutorial unless you are like in the very beginning of the game. And actually, I think when you install Crash of Cars, you start with the button layout, and the joystick controls, I think, is what you have to figure out for yourself. So I think this can be improved into like a separate tab, and it can definitely improve this control method. Now, as far as everything else, there's no need to change everything else. Most of these settings are self-explanatory. The save battery one doesn't actually say exactly what's happening, but we can infer so far that the frame rate is capped at 30 FPS and a couple of graphics are toned down. But apart from that, everything is self-explanatory. You have a few options down below like credit, support, privacy policy, and community. And the community one is actually interesting because you actually get taken to like these links of different groups, and you even get a disclaimer that the content that may appear in these groups may not be safe, which is a good thing, is a good disclaimer to have. And I think it's really nice that in the game itself you actually have links to some communities, which I don't think I have really seen in a lot of games, if not at all. And I think it's really cool that this thing here exists. So, as far as other UI elements, everything is clear. Like you see, you have your missions down here. In this toggle, you have the leaderboard over to the right. And if you're on iOS or Android, you may have differences with like Google Play, the Google Play games. But you have everything here is laid out perfectly. The prestige menu is also really great. Now, I guess one little gripe I have is the fact that you don't actually like do anything with the lowest 3 weapon modifiers. Like you can't actually change anything here, but I'll get to this later on in the gameplay mechanics section. But visually, I would say the game is done really well. And also the browse rarity options down in the bottom right were also overhauled, I think, and the representation is really nice as well. I think the UI in all of these sections is great. So as far as the overall interface and how you interact with the game, I would give this a 9 out of 10. The only reason I'm not giving this a 10 out of 10 is because of the whole button controls thing. I know it's such a minor thing, but if this was like a bit more explained, a bit more visually elaborated, it would have gotten a perfect 10 out of 10 as far as visuals. Now, as for the graphics of the game, I would say there are two camps. When you're playing without the save battery mode, this game has amazing graphics. Like, I have no complaints. Maybe I guess the complaint is that your device heats up a lot, but that's like a nitpick that you would only experience depending on your device. But even on save battery mode, like, the game doesn't look bad. You obviously have toned down graphics, but the game is still very playable. It looks good, and I have no issues with that. I would say the game is vibrant, as in the colors are vibrant, and I like that. They're not muted. Everything is great. I like how the cars are represented. The game obviously has a very cartoony take on things, but I think that is a good way to go about it. You don't really need to have fancy graphics when you're doing this cartoony move. Otherwise, you would have to just push realistic looking elements, and that would just drive the game to be more power hungry for all those graphics you would need to implement to have the game look good. And so this way, I think the game obviously looks nice. Now, yes, if you look like in this menu here at the bottom, all cars have like this generic shadow image beneath them. I think this appears even in the non-save battery mode, but it's like a nitpick, and you only really see this in the menu. And apart from that, it's like gone, and there's like no issue with that. And as far as graphics, I would say the game just looks really great. Everything has been made to look great. And for graphics, I'm going to give this game a 10 out of 10. Yes, a 10 out of 10. I have no complaints about the graphics at all. The game has been designed perfectly. No strange visual bugs or glitches have appeared from what I can recall. The game is just visually appealing, nice to look at, and I would say this is very excellent. Now we're going to move into the next topic, and that is the maps. Now, as far as maps go, this game has like more than 10 maps, dozens of them, and I would say all the maps are amazing. Like, I just like all of the maps. I don't have one favorite really. All the maps are designed greatly, but if I had to like rank them, that would probably be in another video. However, I would say with maps, there are generally a few issues I have come across. For instance, in the Gorge map, one of the issues I have here is I think it's a bit misleading. You have this waterfall section here, which almost makes it look like there's going to be water in this map. But in reality, this map is one of the driest, as in there is no water at all. You can't use the submarine or the Dutchman teleport, and that actually happened to me. I thought there was water somewhere here and I could like teleport, but no, it's just like an abyss, and those cars don't really have their abilities utilized here. And then there's also the fact that there are these slopes, these hills, which slow your car down, and depending on which car you use, are actually really hard to scale, like this segment right here. Like some cars just don't handle these sections really well, and you can get stuck like that. And I think this Gorge map is just filled with these inconsistencies, and I think that this map kind of needs some ironing out. Like that's one issue I have with this map, and definitely needs to be improved. But other than that, I think this is a fine map. No real issues for me here, and I can definitely see this as one of the nicer maps in this game. Now, I don't have those same issues for a lot of the other maps. The jungle map also has some of these issues similarly, and that's another complaint I can probably list here. But other than that, the maps are done very well. They've been thought out to be as large enough to fit the players, but also contain interesting obstacles. Like you have the facility map, which has this very industrial theme to it, and there's also the railgun, which fires in the map, and that's a plus factor you have to look out for when playing there. Then you have Sweet Fields, which literally has a King Jelly object, which once you defeat King Jelly, you get a bunch of crowns. Another element adding to the gameplay, which I'll also mention later in the gameplay section. But I like how all of these maps have a theme, and all those themes are either showcased as out there as like in the Sweet Fields and maybe in the golf course map, and then maybe subtly as like in the Gorge map, which I think just has a lot of hills. I think that's the idea of the map. And then there's the Hypergrid map, which I don't think really goes for having interesting elements to play with in the game, but rather it just goes for the visual look, that retro Hypergrid look. And that also works fine, and I would say all of the maps are done pretty well. They've obviously been thought out well, and I would say like if I had to say like which map I would say also needs work done is the Sky Garden map. I just don't think there's anything like really special going on in the map. Like yes, there are portals going on around, but I think this map just has several areas like the hills, and it just like has a bunch of ramps that you would have to go through. It almost faces the same problems as the Gorge map, but it's not like a bad map. So I would say overall the maps for me, they get an 8 out of 10. The process of adding them is a bit slow, but I understand it's like a whole new thing to add a whole new map, a whole new environment. But I would say an 8 out of 10, mostly because maps can experience some problems which may affect the gameplay. The next thing we're going to look at are the cars. And this is probably going to be one of those longer ones if the previous one wasn't, because there are just so many cars in this game. Starting out with commons. Pretty much the idea here is you have cars all with different basic abilities, like different top speed, different handling, different acceleration, different physics characteristics like weight, and all those types of stuff. And the idea here is also mostly just visually different cars. With commons, you have the liberty to make visually wacky, weird cars, but you don't think too much about their abilities because they are as basic as they can get. And I think this is a category which you mostly pay attention to in the first few uh, moments of the game, like up until when you reach like your epics, legendaries. Once you get into fusion card territory, like up until that point, common cards are relevant, and as your fusing cards. But once you collect the commons, fuse your cards, you probably don't have as much use for common cards as much as you have just fun playing with them around. And I see that's totally fine. Like a lot of these cards, they're obvious references to pop culture, and I'm totally fine with that. Some are like uh, references that you would probably need to look up on the internet to see what their references on. And I would say the cars here are done really well, especially the common cars. I think all cars in the game have like visually good design, but I would say the common cars are like special, especially those which have to unlock by just completing missions. And one category in the common cars is the hidden cars, and this is the category which I think definitely gets the most attention, and what I think elevates this game from many other mobile games. There's a factor about hidden cars, it just makes you play the game more. Think about it, a lot of games you either can just unlock the cars by just playing the game normally by leveling up, or you can just buy them through in-app purchases. In this game, you have an entire category of cars which, if you like didn't go on the internet or you didn't care as to play the game for long, you would probably never even care about or unlock. But if you're deep into this game, you would want to know how to unlock these cars. And for some of these, the unlocking method is really difficult, but that adds to the experience because it allows you to devote yourself to your game, and you get rewarded with some cars which I think more or less just look visually more different than the other common cars. And even some common cars have like very powerful like stats, like top speed, acceleration, and handling, like the minecart and the totem. They have some of the best handling in this game, and that's definitely something to keep in mind. Like these cars elevate the experience of the common cars in Crash of Cars. And then there's like the Chuck 2.0, which I think was added as a celebration of I think 3 years of Crash of Cars. And I actually really like this car. It is kind of tough to unlock. I think you needed 140 or 130 car badges acquired, which I also think is a testament to those players who've been playing this game for a long time, because you're obviously rewarded with a car which I would say maybe needs to just perform a bit better. Like it obviously looks awesome visually, but maybe for like last common car from all in the list, it should probably have an extra punch. And yeah, it also has a really tough quest, and if you get the badge, that's real amazing. So yeah, that's the common section. Really good section, I would say. Interesting cars over here. I don't know if I should probably rank this one. But yeah, we'll just move on with the rare section. Now, in the rare section, you pretty much get the exact same things as a common section, but the stats of the cars are even more extra. Like the sprint car is one of the fastest non-speed cars in the game. I'll give that credit, but it does like have some worse handling to make up for that. And then you have cars like the London Bus and the Retro Wave, which are unlockable by leveling up, so that's another factor. And then you have cars like the Spinner, which actually has some text below, spins when you get crowns. And the thing about some rare cars is that they have this novelty factor. They don't have any unique special abilities, but they have these special visual features. And there's something else which some of these cars have, and that is, like, let's see, the skateboard, which you can actually perform tricks in the air when you hold the right or left button if you're using the button controls. And the same for the Death Incorporated, which is actually reference to a Not Doppler game. This car also does front flips and back flips. So you can see that rare cars, they're not all too different from common cars, but they just have this little extra punch before they move into epic territory, which we will get into later. Oh, and we also have the big slice, which you can unlock by performing tasks in the Sweet Fields map by collecting pieces of cake around the map. Something that's you wouldn't see before in the common car section. Then we get over to the epic car section, where we start to see abilities. And we have cars like the bumper car, which actually doesn't have a special ability, but rather it just controls really well. And it's also one of the smallest cars and has one of the smaller hitboxes, making it very hard to deal damage to in the game. But then you have cars like Limo, which has dual-sided cannons, the fire truck, which can extinguish flamethrowers, and you have like hovercraft, which can hover above water. You basically start to get abilities you couldn't get before. Now, some of these cars have really powerful abilities, like the Rumbler is really powerful, the Shadow, like we all know the Shadow, and then you have like a Supernova and the Pterodrille with some of the most powerful abilities in the game. So I think these cars are like bordering that legendary status, but they have like cons to them, like the Pterodrille and the Supernova control worse, so that they can still remain in the epic category. And then we have the legendaries, which I would say they're like epics, but they don't have like the worst handling attributes to them. They are pretty much like almost flawless machines. You have the pirate ship, really powerful. Speed 2.0, people would say one of the best cars in the game. And we can go all the way to like the Vertigo, which just jumps. And you can see all of these cars, they're just one of the best in the game. Totally deserving legendary status. And then we have the fusion car section, which I would say is a bit misrepresented, or at least misinterpreted, because I don't think this is even better than the legendary section. I actually think the fusion car section is in between the epic and the legendary section, mostly because you have some cars which don't really have better abilities than some legendary cars do, but I think these are like novelty. These are like the secret weapon of cars. You like pull these one out and it's like a whole new territory, a whole new game you're playing. And these mostly just have like the coolest designs, some of the coolest abilities, but they might not be necessarily the best in the game. Now, there are some fusion cars which are better than some legendary cars, but there are also cases where the vice versa applies. And that's pretty much it for the cars. A massive selection of cars, a strong selection of cars. I would give this an easy 9 out of 10. My only issue being the epic car section, where you have like these locked cars, and the thing here is you probably can't ever have all cars unlocked at the same time unless you spend gems to unlock these cars specifically. So if you're a free-to-play player who probably doesn't save up a lot of gems as often, you might not always get these cars in time, but that's like the only issue I have. 9 out of 10 for the cars. Now, let's get into some gameplay. As far as gameplay mechanics go, the game is done very well. You always have the top speed, acceleration, and handling of the cars, which will change depending on which car you use. But I really like how there are like different surfaces you can interact with. So here, for example, I'm driving on a relatively stable surface, but then I drive into this section and I get the slippery surface, which can obviously change how I interact with the game. You then might experience these boosters, which can give you a speed boost, especially noticeable if you have slower cars. You can use these to your advantage, definitely, and also change the game experience. You then have ramps, which can speed you up as you drive on the ramp, allowing you to make big jumps, or they just propel you into the air for airtime. That is also totally fine. Now, the maps are designed in a really interesting way. The maps can be really massive and sometimes tough to memorize, but other times you can just easily get the hang of what is where, and that is certainly fine. Now you always have maps where there are like different levels, you can climb higher in the map, avoid railguns and all that. And I'll talk about weapons soon, but as far as gameplay mechanics go, I think the maps definitely demonstrate a lot of these here. Now, I think in the gameplay mechanics, we can obviously talk about some of the weapons. So, we have gameplay mechanics with the railgun, where it actually took me some time to figure out that the railgun only works in the, I would say, X coordinates. So, if you look at the railgun as like an XYZ coordinate system, you can think of the railgun race as only affecting the X coordinate, and the Y coordinate is pretty much not a factor. Like, you can't shoot a railgun upwards and affect people above you, which is why you have to be conscious of where you fire your railgun, because you could be in a lower floor or a lower level and not actually deal damage or take out anyone who's in a higher or lower level, because that's just how the railgun works. I don't think this was ever clarified while setting up the railgun or in an introduction, and it would have been nice for players to know that the railgun works in just an X coordinate like manner. But other than that, that's pretty much all I can say about that. You have the shield, which can obviously block attacks, and there's even a force field that activates when you disable a shield and propels players farther away from you. A bunch of other stuff like that. The gameplay mechanics, I would say, are mostly fine. They're well balanced, the cars perform very nicely, they're all balanced like I said. Some cars drift a lot, some cars handle very well, but especially the common and rare cars are tuned in a way that there isn't an inherently OP car. In fact, I wouldn't say there is an OP car in this game, or a broken car, as in it's so powerful nothing can counter it effectively. I think every car in this game has a perfect counter, and you just have to work out a way on how to execute that perfect counter. So as far as gameplay mechanics, I know this is an area where I could spend a lot more time on, but I can easily get wrapped up in what I'm saying, so we can just wrap it up here. And I would say the gameplay mechanics get an 8 out of 10. There's certainly room for improvement, but I would say this is a solid area of the game. The next topic we're going to look at are the weapons. So in the armory section, you have a different suit of weapons, and here's how I would describe every weapon as short as I can. The flamethrower is a very solid weapon for dealing close area damage, and their different modifiers can either help you deal damage fast or deal as much area damage around you as possible. The railgun is a solid one kill weapon where you basically kill everyone immediately, but it's also, I would say, a tough weapon to use, because if you don't handle it properly, it can be either as ineffective as possible or just totally wasted. But other times when you know how to use it, you can probably get some of the best results and most kills with this weapon. The cannon is just your classic shooting weapon. You actually have a front, side, and rear cannons, and this is just as classic as weapons go. Freeze cannon freezes opponents, and it's very helpful for when you just want to stop opponents and neutralize them so you can take them out easily. The spread cannon is one of the most powerful weapons. It can act as a railgun if you're good enough, but it mostly works well in close combat situations. The shield, self-explanatory, with the added spin that you can also use it offensively to stun players or to fling them as far away as possible, which I really appreciate, because a lot of games have a very basic shield which prevents you from taking damage, while this one also adds functionality. Then we have the trebuchet, which deals area damage in an interesting way, and I would say it's a very tough weapon to control because you have to anticipate player movements, but when you do know how to use it, it can be pretty deadly. Health is very self-explanatory. You regenerate health. The spikes, they're sort of like a flamethrower, but can be more powerful and definitely a lot more different to use. Landmine is just like a temporary no-go zone. You place it, and anyone who steps into a landmine deals damage. You can't actually configure how much damage you deal, but the settings you have here are pretty fine. The oil just renders you incapable of controlling your car, so real great for creating chaos or for creating traps. But it's a very standard, defensive weapon. The boost can be used defensively or offensively, basically flings you into the air as far as possible and also deals damage if there's anyone in front of the boost. The homing missile pretty much sends a missile, and if you're close to someone, it can actually follow the player and deal damage, so keep that in mind. Use this, you have to pretty much learn how to use it because you have to know when to fire a homing missile for it to be effective. The teleport, pretty self-explanatory, it just teleports you, and the black hole creates this area where if a player enters it, they will be stuck in it, they can't move for a while, and they will take damage. And if you actually fire cannonballs or spread cannon into the black hole, you can actually increase how much damage it does, and that's pretty much about it. Now, I know there are other weapons based on a few specific cars. I won't cover them, but as far as the weapons section goes, I'm actually gonna give this a 7 out of 10, and the reason why is because you don't really see new weapons getting added, and I'm also giving this a 7 out of 10 because you have like these 3 weapons over here which don't have any other modifiers, and maybe there's something else you can do to add some modifiers to these. But apart from specific cars getting specific weapons, you don't really see any new weapons. You pretty much get the same setup that you would get as if you were playing years ago. So as far as this goes, I'm just going to give this a 7 out of 10. Maybe one of the weaker points in this game, mostly because it's just not updated, and I think a few new weapons might be a good fresh of breath there. And because this is a free game, we have to include this as a section of this review, and that is the ads. This game can display ads in between games, and you can also voluntarily watch ads to claim coins and stuff. So I would say, like, the ads that you see, the amount of ads you see, I would say is fine, but I think 2 things can be done. One, maybe you can slightly tone down how much ads people see. And the second thing that can be done is to filter the ads, because sometimes the ads are like somewhat strange. I wouldn't say they are inappropriate, but they're just rather strange and out of place. And I don't know how not Doppler can control this, but I would say that's what the ads can have changed in them. But other than that, I think it's fair. We have to keep in mind this is a free game, and the ads are the only way the company can make money if we don't actually purchase anything. So I would say the ads are like an 8 out of 10. And I'm only ranking them high because they're not obtrusive. They're really there in, I would say, the fairest way possible. And as far as the miscellaneous category goes, the leaderboard section of the game is one area where I can cover, and I think I would say the only issue is there's only an hourly leaderboard, which of course after an hour what you've done basically gets wiped, which by the nature of the game I understand, but one thing I have a problem with is like there isn't like an overall leaderboard. There is a Google Play Games leaderboard for this game, but it's the top of the leaderboard is just filled with impossible scores. So I think that maybe an overall leaderboard in the menu of the game might be nice to add. The next thing I would probably say definitely needs to have an improvement is the skirmish mode. Now, there was a time where skirmish mode was used to farm coins, and I understand why it was nerfed. But I think skirmish mode was nerfed so much that even if you do spend a lot of time getting a high score, the payout is still way too low to really be considered good. So I think skirmish mode needs to have a slightly higher payout, not too much so that it's overpowered and you can easily farm, but just enough so that it's not irrelevant. Because I think as a game mode it's fine, but the payout is, I think, a little bit too little for what you can actually achieve in the game mode. You also have a few game modes like Team Deathmatch and Capture the Flag. Very great move to finally have new game modes implemented into the game. Very solid move from Doppler. So I would say this overall miscellaneous category gets a 9 out of 10 for me. Based on all these factors, I think we can round that as a nice number. So, if I were to sum this whole review up, this whole game, I would say a 9 out of 10 is what I would give to Crash of Cars. A very solid mobile game, one of the best I've probably ever played, but there are just a few small hiccups here and there that just prevent this from being the absolute best. I would say the top of the line. Now, for future reviews where I will review only the new content from the updates, I would probably have to say if the car added or the maps added were better than the last one previously added. And from this current update where I am, let's take a look at the last fusion car added, which was a Snow Mason. I would say this was a very solid car to add. One of the best power-up abilities, I would say. And I just really like the look of this car. I would give the Snow Mason a 9 out of 10. I'm giving out a lot of 9 out of 10s, but nothing, I don't think a lot of things have really been perfect in a lot of the things I ranked right now, but I think the Snow Mason is one solid car. I would say 9 out of 10. So for future reference, keep in mind the score. The last map that was added into this game as far as the new maps was the Sky Garden map, which was actually added, I think, more than half a year ago. And like I said before, it is a good map, but I think there are a few things in it which I don't like the layout, the ramps, how the map controls, but I do like new portals, and I do like some of the other aspects of it. But I would give the map a 7 out of 10. There's definitely some room to improve if they were to add another map later down the road. So, if you managed to make it all the way to the end of this video, this lengthy Crash of Cars review, make sure to comment, rate, and subscribe. Don't forget to watch my other videos, and I will see you later. Peace.